20th to order. And I'll just repeat it one more time for the video. This is the January 20th meeting of the Charter Revision Commission here in Hartford, and we are gaveling in at 7:01 p.m. And I will start with agenda item number 1, the roll call. James Wolf is here. Raul De Jesus Jr.
Here.
John Gale.
Here.
Alexandra Aponte.
Here.
Runen Aralampalam.
Here.
Steve Bonafante. Vicki Gallen Clark.
Present.
Kamora Harrington. Kenneth Kennedy.
Here.
Kathleen Kowalishin. Alvin Medina.
Here.
Yadira Jeter.
Here.
Bruce Rubenstein.
Here.
And Ian Smith.
Here.
All right, folks, we have a quorum, and I will move on to item number 2, which is approval of the minutes from December 16th, 2021 and January 11th, 2022. Do we have a motion?
So moved. Second.
The motion's been made and properly seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? You guys have it. The motion carries unanimously. There is no chairman's report tonight. So we'll move on to item number 4, which is the panel discussion. So with regards to tonight's conversation, I want to be intentional about setting the table. We're getting to the point in this charter revision process where we need to and be mindful about how we use our time in these meetings. We've got 3 invited guests tonight. We've got Hartford Corporation Counsel Howard Rifkin, Michael Lawler, who is currently a member of the New Haven Board of Police Commissioners, and Ronald Quagliani, who is a member of the City Council in West Haven and is a former police chief there. Our guests are not here tonight to debate or to consider hypothetical questions about different scenarios for police oversight in the city. They're here to offer insights into the structures in place in the municipalities that they're associated with. So I'd ask the commissioners to keep their questions germane to the experience and background of each of our guests tonight. And I'd also ask that everyone be cognizant of the time that we spend with questions, because we do have a discussion regarding appointing authority after this tonight. We also have an action item to consider. And then following the discussion with our guest this evening, I'm going to ask Attorney Mennick to provide a brief overview of section 7-474F of the Connecticut General Statutes as it pertains to our discussion. And then he can also talk about some other conversations he's had with folks throughout the state and his research regarding police commissions in other municipalities in the state and around the country. So does anyone have any questions about the kind of the ground rules for the discussion this evening? Okay, great. Up first, I'm going to give the floor to Howard Rifkin, the Corporation Counsel for the City of Hartford. Howard can offer some insights on the current status of the CPRB, the formation of the PARB, and then the Cintron versus Vaughn consent decree that the City of Hartford remains under as well. So Howard, you have the floor. Thank you for coming tonight.
Sorry about that. Thanks, James. I appreciate the invitation, and I'll be brief. I would encourage conversation and questions. That would be perfectly appropriate and fine. And I understand that this consideration of police commissions is in the context of oversight and accountability of police departments. And so what I want to try to do is frame for you some of the ways in the city of Hartford currently there is oversight and accountability. So I'll start with briefly with the Civilian Police Review Board. I think most of you know that in fact, the original consideration of creating a Civilian Police Review Board comes out of the Cintron versus Vaughn case that goes back to 1969, in fact, and is still a consent decree under which the police department and the city of Hartford operates. I'll get into that in a little bit. But in effective April 1st of last year, there were substantial and substantive changes made to the Civilian Police Review Board. Previously, its work had mostly been a review of complaints filed against police officers and investigated by Internal Affairs. And then they would review the findings of Internal Affairs and make comments, but they were purely advisory. What the City Council did was they adopted a series of amendments to the Civilian Police Review Board, the most significant of which were the fact that there would be concurrent reviews, a concurrent review of any civilian complaint against a police officer. And that would occur along with the Internal Affairs Division investigation. It would be a separate but concurrent review of the complaint. The second thing was the establishment of an Inspector General who is charged with the responsibility of conducting the separate and concurrent investigation into a civilian complaint. And in fact, just in the last 2 weeks, a permanent Inspector General has been hired. His name is Liam Brennan. He is a former assistant U.S. attorney, among other things. And I don't believe that he has started quite yet, but will be in a matter of weeks. The third area of reform, and I think significant, is that where at the end of a review, an investigation of a civilian complaint, there is a disagreement between the findings of the Civilian Police Review Board or the Inspector General and what the intended findings are of the police department. At that point, the matter would be referred to an independent arbitrator who is a retired jurist, and the arbitrator would listen to the case presented by Internal Affairs on the one hand, and separately by the Inspector General on the other hand, and make a final decision reduced to writing and made public. If in fact the findings of the Civilian Police Review Board are affirmed, then the police chief would be directed to take the appropriate action and mete out the appropriate discipline. And the fourth, I think, significant change to the CPRB is that on its own motion, the review board can initiate an investigation of a public incident when they find that the public interest is served by doing so. They can also initiate a complaint where they believe that a specific incident has occurred, but no civilian or no citizen complaint has been filed. So those are some of the, I think, more significant changes that have been made. The effective date of that those changes was April 1st, 2021. So it's pretty much still in its infancy. With respect to the PARB, the Police Accountability Review Board, that was established in June of 2021 by resolution of the Court of Common Council. Its charter, and you have it in the documents, so I feel like I'm just reading what's in the documents, but just to that are before you, but just to sort of highlight it. Their charter is to review and make recommendations on a number of policies and issues, including but not limited to cadet training, hiring practices, staffing for managerial and command positions, training practices, including de-escalation techniques, appropriate use of weapons and equipment, and community outreach and initiatives. The PARB has met a couple of times, I think because of the pandemic. It has not met as often as the resolution calls for. There are conversations about making a commitment to get regular meetings scheduled and an agenda, and engaging the Accountability Review Board on an agenda as I just described. The third thing I wanted to mention, James did as well, is that since really 1973, a case, well, let me back up. In 1969, a case was filed, civil rights case was filed against City of Hartford and its police department, styled Cintron versus Vaughn. It alleged that that there were constitutional violations by the Hartford police against the plaintiffs on the basis of race or ancestry. In 1973, the case that was certified as a class action. A Cintron negotiating committee was established, a consent decree and stipulation was entered into. In 1990, there was a motion for modification of the consent decree and a motion for contempt on the part of the city for violating aspects of the stipulated agreement. There was a special master appointed, and beginning in 2004, there was an effort to negotiate around the motion for contempt, and in 2010, a settlement agreement was reached under the auspices of Magistrate Judge Joan Margolis. Some of the aspects of Cintron include substantial revision to the citizens' complaint procedure, which actually led to the adoption of the Civilian Police Review Board by the City Council. A requirement of reporting results of internal investigations of police officers' actions, behavior, goals for hiring and promotions, with the notion that the Hartford Police Department ought to look more like the community it serves, both at the police officer level as well as among the command staff. There are training standards articulated in Cintron, officer conduct, particularly involving interaction with minorities and minority groups. There are aspects of firearms training and standards and protocols, modification of pursuit policies, continuing reporting to the Cintron Negotiating Committee, on settlements involving cases alleging police misconduct and other matters. But it is an active consent decree. It is one that the city meets quarterly or now semi-annually with the Cintron Negotiating Committee and Judge Margolis, who we did before the pandemic. And so it does provide some context and with respect to oversight and governance around our police department. The final point that I would make or bring to your attention as you have this conversation is the fact that for the last couple of years, 3 years, I think, the Hartford Police Department is seeking Tier 1 accreditation. There is accreditation is through the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies and through the Police Officer Standards and Training Council, known as POST. Interesting to note that less than 1% of law enforcement agencies in the country have any form of accreditation. And our department is, as I said, seeking Tier 1 accreditation. They're hoping for an on-site review this spring and full accreditation late this year or early next. I think the whole accreditation process, for those who don't know, is based on standards which are reflective of best practices in law enforcement. The accreditation standards in the review process includes roles and responsibilities of officers, relationship with other agencies of the police department, law enforcement operations, operational support, and traffic law enforcement, detainee and court-related services, and auxiliary and technical services. Those are the sort of broad areas of review. The police department has been, as I said, over the last 3 years, working on rewriting and updating policies and practices and procedures for the department, which are part of the accreditation review process. So those are some of the highlights of ways in which in the city of Hartford there is an attention to police oversight and accountability. And I'm happy to answer any questions that any of the members of the commission have.
Great, thanks, Howard. And Councilman Quagliani had to leave for a family emergency. So we'll just have Mr. Rifkin and Mr. Lawler speaking with us tonight, so we can bifurcate the conversation. If folks have questions for Howard now, please feel free to raise your hand and ask your questions. And then we'll go on to Mr. Lawler. And I see that Commissioner Gallen-Clark has a question. So Commissioner Gallen-Clark, you have the floor.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I would like to ask Attorney Rifkin. So usually, Attorney Rifkin, I usually read all my documents before the meeting. Today, I did not get a chance to do that. So if it's buried in the documents, please forgive me. Would you just share with me what are the general requirements for the Inspector General, and what's the protocol as far as advertising that position?
We went through a process of advertising, well, first writing a job description for the Inspector General. If you want, I can find the provision of the ordinance and read it, but it's in your documents. But
okay, that's fine.
What the city did was through our Human Resources Department, wrote a job description based on what was in the ordinance, advertised the position in a number of ways through various organizations that work in the area of law enforcement. As I don't have the list of where all the advertisements were placed. I hired an executive search firm to do some recruiting for this position. The first time around, it was believed that there was not a full and robust number of people who were qualified. So that's in, I hope that answers your question.
And where can I find the job description? And you're holding it up?
No, well, what I have is a description of the Inspector General that's in the ordinance.
Okay.
I don't know if the job description is still online. I can get you a copy of it, I'm sure, through.
Yeah, I would love to see a copy if you don't, if you can get that to me. Thank you. Sure.
Can you send me your email address?
Absolutely.
I'm howard.rifkin@hartford.gov.
Okay.
And that way I'll be reminded to do that.
Okay.
And we can send it around to the rest of the commission as well.
Sure. Just to be clear, as I said at the outset, recently an offer has been made and accepted for the permanent position.
Mm-hmm.
Steve, do you have a comment?
Just a clarification, supplemental clarification for Commissioner Gallon Clark. The ordinance description is on page 10 of the documents that you have in your packet.
Thank you. I'll look at that now. Thank you.
I'd also just say that the committee that was established by ordinance to select the Inspector General, who is a member, will be a member of the civil service in the city, included the mayor, president of the city council, and the chair of the Civilian Police Review Board.
Any other questions, Commissioner Gallon Clark?
Not at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Kennedy.
Thank you. Good evening, Alan. I mean, Howard, excuse me.
I can, that's all right.
Briefly, you talked about the Inspector General, the independence. Who does that person report to?
It's an independent office, and it reports to, that person will report to the Civilian Police Review Board.
So the boss is the Civilian Police Review Board, not the executive?
Yes.
Not the chief, not the chief of police?
No. It is intentionally completely separate and apart from the Hartford Police Department.
What are the budget protections for the independent with the Inspector General's office?
I'm not sure what you mean by budget protections.
Audit commission, you cannot lower the audit commission budget. Once you give the money, that's pretty much it. You can't take it back next year. Are there any type of protections for that with the Inspector General? The reason the audit commission has that is because when the audit commission does something that the executive doesn't like, the executive can't seek retribution.
Well, the budget for the Inspector General is appropriated by the Court of Common Council, and that's and they have done that. So the budget for this current fiscal year, I believe, is $200,000.
Okay. You mentioned a resolution that I was not aware of. Was that not an ordinance, or is that just a resolution from the City Council with respect to
the Police Accountability Review Board?
Yep. Yes.
Yeah, it's in your package, starting on page. I don't know, Steve Mednick, you tell me. It's following in your documents. the description of the and the ordinance on this
Page 11.
Civilian Police Review Board. Yeah.
And the reason I voiced that is just to my fellow commissioners is just that my concern there, if it's not an ordinance, resolutions die with the council. And if you're looking to sell that as a permanent viewpoint versus a commission potential setup, that's, you know, that's a little, you'd like to see something more permanent, potentially. Just my observation.
Yeah, no, just to interrupt and say that there is in one of the resolve clauses of the resolution, it talks about the council working with the mayor to convert this to a city ordinance. Okay. That has not happened yet, but there is a recognition of that.
Okay. Finally, the person you hired, are they a resident of the city of Hartford?
No.
Have they lived in an urban area before?
I don't know. I know that he worked for the U.S. Attorney's Office and was in New Haven, I believe.
Okay. Minority candidate?
He is not a minority.
Okay. I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Kennedy. Any other questions from the commission? See, Steve. Yeah.
I just want to, for Mr. Kennedy's edification, Mr. Brennan was one of 4 candidates for the State Inspector General position.
Thank you, Howard. Steve, do you have a question or comment? You're on mute, Steve. Steve, you're on mute.
Yeah, I'll defer to any commissioners if there are any other questions, but I have one question for the Corporation Counsel, if that's all right. Howard, with respect to the disciplinary role for the Civilian Review Board, the disciplinary process, is it governed by collective bargaining agreement in Hartford?
Yes.
Is the process that we have based under this ordinance recognized in the collective bargaining agreement?
Well, let me clarify that the CPRB does not mete out discipline.
So it reviews discipline.
What they do is they do findings of fact and determine whether or not a complaint, citizen complaint, is sustained. If that is the case, and let's say the Internal Affairs Review doesn't sustain that particular complaint, then the matter can go to an arbitrator who is a former judge. And if the arbitrator sides with the Civilian Police Review Board, then the chief of police is directed to mete out the appropriate discipline under policies and collective bargaining agreement.
So it is covered by the collective bargaining agreement.
Well, it's not recognized in the current collective bargaining agreement, if that was the question.
All right. And there's been no issue.
But we don't believe that the way it's constructed violates the current collective bargaining agreement.
But if discipline were meted by the chief from this outside source, is that protected or covered by the collective bargaining agreement? Is that recognized?
Well, I mean, we have had internal discussions as to whether or not that could lead to a grievance.
Yeah.
And it could maybe, but I would just say that in the selection of arbitrators, the president of the Hartford Police Union was involved. And the
tacit consent to the approach.
And in fact, we sought input from the Hartford Police Union when we were drafting the amended version of the ordinance.
All right. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions for the Corporation Counsel? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much, Howard, for coming tonight. We will be discussing this as a group at a later meeting, potentially our next meeting. So I anticipate that there may be additional questions coming from us and clarifications. So
happy to reappear. And I'm going to hang around and listen to Lawler because I always learn something when I hear from him.
Great, thank you. All right, Steve, do you want to, you have a longer relationship with Mr. Lawler than I do. So if you want to provide the introduction, feel free to take it away. Steve, you're on mute.
I realize that my desk is piled with paper and I was trying to manipulate my mouse so that I can introduce my good friend, Mike Lawler. I've known Mike for many, many years, going back to the 80s, 90s when we were young pups in Connecticut politics. And he's had an extraordinary career in the General Assembly, the Judiciary Committee, and served for many years. I think Howard probably knew him very well there as Undersecretary for Criminal Justice Policy and Planning at OPM. In his so-called retirement from the state, he is now a professor, an associate professor of criminal justice in the Criminal Justice Department at my good friend, Henry C. Lee College of Criminal Justice and Forensic Sciences at the University of New Haven. Ironically, the Chief Quagliani, who is with us, is the head of security at the public safety at the University of New Haven as well. And I'm really sorry he couldn't join us. He really had a family emergency, literally emerge while we were here at this meeting tonight. Mike is really one of the renowned experts on police and procedures and strategies and approaches for the departments. And I think we're very, very lucky to have him here tonight. And I'd like to just introduce my good friend and terrific servant, Mike Lawler.
Well, thank you, Steve, and thanks, Mr. Chairman, for inviting me here tonight. As Howard said, and as Steve has said, we've all known each other for a long time, and I just want to be clear, it was the 1980s and 90s that Steve and I, not the 1880s, right? But anyway, a couple of things. So actually, at the moment, as you were told earlier, I'm a member of the New Haven Board of Commissioners, Police Commissioners, right? It's also the case that Governor Lamont appointed me to be a member of the Police Officer Standards and Training Council. You may not be aware of that, but I think it's, as you try and assess the importance of adding a police commission for Hartford, I think it's important that you kind of get a sense of the hierarchy of accountability for law enforcement agencies. So let me start with POST, which is the statewide sort of oversight of police training, standards, certification, decertification. And so I'm a member of that because the whole operation was reconstituted in the summer of 2020 as part of the police accountability legislation at the Capitol, right? So all the members were basically, their terms ended and a whole new group was appointed. It became much bigger. There was many more community members, including 2 justice-involved persons, an academic like myself. There's an advocate for disabilities. There's, there's a mental health expert on there now to give some balance to what in the past had been mainly sort of a law enforcement run operation. And at the end of the day, it's the Post Counsel that decides whether or not to decertify a police officer. In order to be a cop, you have to have a license, a certification. It's good for 3 years. But under certain circumstances, you can have that certification taken away from you, which means you're no longer licensed to be a cop in Connecticut, meaning you can't work anywhere. And I mention that because with the legislation enacting a new state inspector general, a statewide inspector general, that new inspector general has the independent authority to ask Post Counsel to decertify a police officer. And you heard earlier that Liam Brennan, who was a lawyer, former United States attorney, he does live in New Haven. He's lived here his entire adult life, as far as I know. But Liam is an extraordinary guy, and I think he'll bring a lot of value to this commission, to your commission, as your new Inspector General. And I say that because he was essentially the runner-up for the statewide job. He lost out to Judge Devlin, who was a retired state judge, who now is in that role. Both Judge Devlin and Attorney Brennan are very well respected. And the point is that the new Inspector General for the state has the authority to recommend officers to be decertified. In other words, to have their license taken away. And that's new because in the past, it was only a police chief who could recommend decertification for one of his officers, right? And so if a police chief, for whatever reason, chose not to recommend decertification, it would never even get to the police council. The new statewide Inspector General has the independent authority, doesn't answer to any police agency, is part of the Chief State's Attorney's Office, but an independent and autonomous part within that office. They now can field complaints and investigate them independently. So for example, if a complaint came from anyone in Hartford about a Hartford police officer, that can go directly to the statewide Inspector General also. They obviously would, the new Inspector General probably pick and choose the kinds of cases he wants to get involved with, but that's an option that did not exist before. Once you have a Hartford Inspector General, it's more likely that that Inspector General would be able to investigate more complaints from the community in Hartford, and maybe some of those could be referred to the statewide Inspector General, and then ultimately could lead to either a criminal prosecution, because the new inspector, the statewide Inspector General, has the authority to bring charges against a police officer for excessive force, that type of criminal charges. In addition, or instead of that, they could also refer to have the officer decertified. So what you've got being developed in Hartford is a sort of an incremental process to get to that point, the decertification or potentially criminal charges against a police officer. I want to explain how the New Haven Board of Police Commissioners is constructed, because this is, there's a lot of differences between how things happen in Hartford and how things happen in New Haven. So what I would like to do is briefly describe the authority that our commission has in New Haven. And I think as I go, I can mention how these are things that don't exist in Hartford in the same way, but in sort of in an indirect way, they might, not all of them, but some of them could be fulfilled through this Hartford Inspector General role. So what are the main powers of the New Haven Board of Police Commissioners? Okay, for starters, it's our, well, there's 6 of us, right? We're all appointed by the mayor, and we're all we're confirmed by the New Haven Board of Alders, which is the equivalent of the Common Council, right? And so there are 6 of us, and we have the final decision on hiring all police officers. So the department brings candidates to us. We conduct our own separate interviews. We review their entire background, all the background, you know, the polygraph, the psychological assessment, whatever drama they may have in their lives, whatever potential disqualifying type conduct in the past. And so we get to meet and interview each one of the candidates to be a New Haven police officer. And we have the final say. More often than not, we go along with what it's the chief that makes the final recommendations to us, but more often than not, we go along with that, although there have been some instances where we have declined to appoint someone who's being recommended by the department. We also have the final say on removing people from the list. So it's a civil service process. Candidates take a test, they score out, they're ranked, and then they begin this vetting process, which involves an agility test and a polygraph and a background check, that kind of thing. Sometimes the department wants to remove people from the list, and ultimately it's our decision as a police commission whether or not to actually remove someone as a potential candidate. And we do get these recommendations from the chief. There are occasions, it's not infrequent, I would estimate maybe 10, 20% of the time, we disagree with the chief's recommendation. So maybe it's, well, when we disagree on a removal, it's our decision not to remove someone from the list. So I'll give you a couple of examples. There are some candidates who maybe are 30 years old, and maybe when they're 17, 18, 19 years old, acknowledged in the polygraph that they had used various types of drugs or been involved in different kinds of misconduct. Some people in the polygraph process initially give one explanation as an answer to a question, and then they change it. In the past, that was almost an automatic disqualifier. And what we as a commission have tried to bring to this is the community perspective. And there are times that we say, okay, look, all right, technically that's a problem, but given the amount of time that's gone by, given the other successes these candidates have had in their lives, they now have a family, they've got a responsible job. So it's our final decision whether or not to remove people from the list. So we hire the candidates that have been all the way through the academy. We remove people from the list. And we also have the final say on all promotions within the department. So whether it's sergeant, lieutenant, or captain, the chief will recommend candidates for such a promotion to us. We do interviews of each of these candidates, and we have a final vote on whether or not to approve of this. And so recently, and by the way, I should say, I'm not speaking on behalf of the commission. I'm not the chair of it. I'm only recounting things that have actually happened, and to give you a sense of the dynamics on our commission. So one concern that I have and other members of the commission seem to have is that at the very top ranks of our department, they're all white commanders, right? And that wasn't the case until recently, but there's been a lot of retirements. And so there's been a lot of pressure to identify qualified minority candidates, persons of color, women, to move up into the ranks. And so we have the ability to bring some sort of pressure, persuasion to things like that. And I think it's fair to say that every member of our commission takes that very seriously, and we do it. Just to give you an idea who else is on the commission, Professor Tracy Mears from the Yale Law School, who's a nationally known advocate for police reform. She was appointed by the mayor. We have Don Walker, who is the husband of State Rep Tony Walker. He's a professor at Gateway Community College in New Haven. We have a retired firefighter on the commission. We have a pastor from the community on the commission. And our chair, she is a longtime, she's a high-ranking official in our housing authority in New Haven. So it's a very diverse group. I happen to be the only white guy, not there's anything wrong with that, but and I think we try and reflect as best we can the concerns of the community, because I kind of view my role there kind of like I did as a legislator. I'm representing my district in this deliberative body, and I think that's kind of how it works in New Haven. The other thing is we have the authority to approve or change any recommendations for discipline of a police officer if the chief has recommended a discipline in excess of 15 days. So it's completely the chief's prerogative to investigate using internal affairs complaints against police officers, and the chief has the sole authority to impose a discipline of 15 days or 15-day suspension or less, or something else, right? If she recommends a discipline in greater than 15 days, then we would have the final say. And we had one of those a week or so ago. And so we get a complete briefing from internal affairs. We get all of the files, and there's a hearing where the police union has their say, the union representing the chief, the attorney representing the chief will weigh in. It'll be kind of sort of like a mini trial, so to speak, and then we would deliberate and we would have the final say. And in this most recent one, our decision was very different than what the chief had recommended. This is all done very respectfully, by the way. We're trying to factor in a bunch of things, and I won't bore you with the details on that one. It was all reported in the newspaper if you want to go Google it, but it's an interesting process. And none of those things I think are options available to in the context of how Hartford works at the moment. The final thing I want to say is that if a police officer is going to be terminated, fired, that would be our final decision as well, right? And so in addition to these disciplinary things, we also have the final say on approving new general orders or the policies that govern the department. And very recently, we had to do a lot of this because the new statewide police accountability bill required almost every department in the state to reconsider, rewrite their policies to conform with the statewide mandate. And so at the end of the day, we had to meet with the chief and meet with the staff, the senior command, get a sense of what they are recommending. We did tweak some of these things, but ultimately we vote yes or no on these initiatives. In addition, in our regular meetings, we get updates on all the pending internal affairs investigations. And we're not involved in the investigation, but in our monthly meetings, they give us a sense of, we go through each one, they tell us what it's about, what's going on. So we're generally aware of the kinds of complaints that are coming in against the police. We don't have any say in it unless the chief is recommending a discipline of more than a 15-day suspension. But we're aware of everything that's going on. And the final things I want to mention are the fact that we also get updates related to litigation where the police department is being sued. So we're briefed on that every month. We have a general idea what's going on. Good news is that there's fewer of those than there were in the past. But it's important for us to be aware of what's going on. And the Corporation Counsel in New Haven and the mayor's office and others are very helpful in helping us get a grasp on it. And in case you're wondering, I think I kind of mentioned this, but I just want to say, like, we don't always agree with the department or maybe others in the administration about what an outcome should. I mean, no one tells us what they think we should do, but it is a very independent authority. I'm generally familiar with police commissions elsewhere in the state, right? Every community does it differently, different ways of appointing the members. There's different numbers of members in some towns and cities, like the mayor or the first selectman is the equivalent of the police commission. And more often than not, that's in the smaller towns. So there's a pretty diverse array of ways of doing this. And I'm only saying that because the New Haven is not the standard model for doing it. It's just the way we've done it. I also want to mention that in recent years, New Haven has added a police review board to the mix. The Board of Alders appointed it. The New Haven Police Review Board does not have anywhere near the authority that your new Citizen Police Review, what is it called? I forget. The one with there's no Inspector General, for example. There's no direct authority to make independent recommendations independent of the police chief and have them go to an arbitrator if people disagree. So I think your entity is much stronger than New Haven's entity, right, in terms of our civilian review board. On the other hand, our police commission is very, we have a lot of authority to do things. The only thing we can't do is independently investigate complaints against police. So whether or not we should have that authority, and if we did, how much staff we should have, and should we be sort of one step removed from the police department, more so than we are at the moment, those are all legitimate policy questions. So basically, that's a little bit about our authority, and it's one model, and I don't recommend it necessarily to everybody. It's just the way we do it.
All right, thank you, Mr. Lowe. That was incredibly helpful, incredibly helpful. We'll now open it up for questions from the commissioners.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Rubenstein, you are recognized first, and then we'll have Commissioner Medina up second. Commissioner Rubenstein, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, first of all, thank you, Representative Lawler. I knew you as a representative, and before that as a prosecutor. Thank you very much for your talk tonight. One thing I think you forgot to mention, or maybe it slipped your mind, was that some towns and cities in Connecticut have elected police commissioners, as opposed to what New Haven has, which is all 6 of you, which are picked by the mayor. So Mike, one question I have, and I have 2 questions. One question is the mayor's selection of the 6 of you. Was there an ad hoc committee started by the mayor to help him or her select the 6 of you, or was this done on his own? And secondly, are you aware that many towns and many cities across the country have elected police commissioners, such as Atlanta, Detroit, Seattle, Kansas City, and many other towns across the country? Thank you.
Yeah, there's a lot of diversity on how this is done around the country. I am aware that some municipalities in Connecticut elect their police commissioners. The process for me was the former chief, who, interestingly, I've been teaching at the University of New Haven since 1995, to give you an idea. And pretty much everybody on the police department who went to college went to the University of New Haven. So they're all former students of mine, including former Chief Reyes. And Chief Reyes and I, we happened to be in the same restaurant, and he texted me. He said, hey, would you consider being on the police commission in New Haven? I said, sure, why not? No problem. I'm out of government. And he said, okay, cool. And he said, but to do it, you need to fill out, there's a website in New Haven that says, if you want to be appointed to a board or commission, you more or less apply. And I did. And some period of time later, the mayor called me and we had a long chat, and he ultimately nominated me. I don't know what process he went through to pick the other people, but I know his the one before me was Tracy Mears, who is, like I said, a professor at the law school. And I think it's, without in any way sounding condescending or anything like that, I just want to say, my impression is, given who's on the commission now, that a deliberate effort has been made to make sure the commission is independent-minded and experienced and thorough, and understands that we're in a time of reform. And I view my role as to help steward the New Haven Police Department from where it used to be to where it's going to end up. And I'd say the same about every police department in the country right now.
Thank you.
Do you have another question, Commissioner Rubenstein?
No,
Okay.
I don't. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Rubenstein. Commissioner Medina.
Hey, Attorney Lawler, it's good to see and talk to you again. I remember working with you in your days working for Governor Malloy, and you've always been just incredible with your expertise on things related to criminal justice and policing. So thankful to your service to the state. I had a question that I think for me is kind of the theoretical crux of what the charter is reviewing. There's a component of a misconduct happens and it's investigated that is a arm of accountability. And then there's this other component of accountability where we're talking about oversight, hiring, policymaking, which fits far more within the police commission kind of framework. And one of my biggest frustrations as a resident of Hartford, based on personal experience, has been, and this is, I have found this common among other forms of local government, so not to pick on Hartford, but city council members feel uncomfortable governing or policy making for the police department by ordinance. And what's interesting to me about a police commission, especially the one in New Haven, is that you have policy making authority, at least from what I've read. And I wanted to get a sense more what that actually means in practice. Does the commission review the existing policy manual, make recommendations? Well, and as I read in New Haven, you seem to, your setup is it's not necessarily you're providing advice to the chief. The commission in New Haven itself is the policy-making body for the police department, at least as I read it. So I was hoping you could give us just more insight about what that process looks like. And thinking of it from the perspective of residents who may want to see a change in their police department and engaging the New Haven Police Commission to see that change in policy happen.
Yeah, so those are all good questions. Yes, it's true that the New Haven Board of Police Commissioners has the final say over policies, right? I'm not sure, I've only been on it for a year, right? So I'm not sure if in the past the commission itself initiated a new policy change. It seems like everything that's happened since I've been there has been the chief brings to us a proposed policy, and we review it, and in some cases recommended changes be made, and then those changes were made, and then we approved it. So in that way, yes, I mean, we're writing policy. We're not writing it from scratch. It remains to be seen whether, if our Board of Police Commissioners said, we want to, on our own, create some new policy. And here it is. I'm guessing we have the authority to do it, but I just don't know on that. But let me also say this. At the moment, mainly due to the police accountability bill, many of the most relevant policies are now essentially mandated on a statewide level. And so that's the role that Post is playing. And like I said, I'm on the Post Council too, and we are gradually rewriting the statewide policies that have now become mandatory for local police departments to adopt, right? And so in a way, that responsibility has been pushed up to the statewide level. And I'll give you one quick example, because this has come up in New Haven recently. This distinction between, so I'm talking about use of force, excessive force, right? In the past, it seems like a number of places have a policy that if the use of force is justified, then there's no discipline. A very significant change happened on a statewide basis, which is now the policy that's essentially been mandated for the state is, it's not good enough that it's justified, it has to be necessary, right? And that's a very important distinction. So for example, and I'm not casting aspersions on any individual officer, I'm simply saying, like, if you thought that if X, Y, and Z happens, you would be justified in shooting somebody. And because you're justified, you would be cleared of doing that, no wrongdoing, then you're going to get some bad outcomes. If instead the policy is, okay, whether it's justified or not, you can only do it if you can show that you felt it was necessary, which is an important distinction. And what that means is that officers have to use judgment. It's not so more of like a technical thing. It's more of a critical thinking type thing. And recently there's been some decisions made in different departments where they said, okay, it's okay, it was justified. Well, but that's not the question anymore. The question is, was it really necessary? Or was it really necessary? And going forward, that's how uses of force are going to be governed. And trust me, that is a big change. And it's going to take a while to train officers around the state what that really means. Not to mention the obligation now under the new state law officers have a duty to intervene if they see another officer using excessive force. So, and if you fail to do that, that's actually a crime, right? So, I mean, these are big changes, and policies have to evolve to conform to these changes. And so the Post Council and at the local level, it's important to look at every policy and figure out, do we need to tweak these existing policies to conform to what the new statewide rules are? And so it's not a question of like rewriting the whole thing. It's just a question of going back and making sure that everything is properly updated.
That's helpful. My other question relates to the hiring process. New Haven, I think, has provided to be, in some cases, an exceptional outlier in police hiring, where, as I understand it, the police commission disagreed on hirings of some officers based on the background check that the commission did that resulted in findings of prior forms of misconduct or questionable behavior at a different department. And just from a historical perspective, is that a finding that would have happened if those hires were left to the department or to the department and the chief on their own, or was that really the distinction or the kind of key thing that the police commission plays in terms of an independent overview of like who's being hired within the police department?
Yeah, well, I can't talk about the past beyond the year I've been on it, but I can say since I've been on it, there have definitely been people who might have, I'm trying to be diplomatic here, but that's just one thing, for example, domestic violence. There are some people who are coming in where in the past they've had some documented instances of domestic violence. Maybe they didn't even get arrested because, you know, this all comes up in the polygraph process and in the background check. And that is something that the commission in particular has steered clear of. Now, I'm not saying that the department was recommending them. This is all a civil service process, right? This is, you take a test and you get scored, and you it's not really discretionary at that point. The discretion comes when recommendation is made to us to either remove somebody or not hire them, that kind of thing. What I can say, though, to your question is, under the new law from 2020, the Police Accountability Bill, if you left a department while under investigation, you are not eligible to be a police officer anywhere else in Connecticut. So that's like, you're done. And so these are the changes that will have a big impact. But in the past, you know, there are people who have been able to move from one department to another, even, you know, they resign while under investigation to avoid a finding of misconduct and get hired somewhere else.
Those were my questions. Thanks so much, Attorney Lawler, for your time.
Thank you, Commissioner Medina. Any other questions from the commissioners? Okay, seeing none. Attorney Mennick, I saw you up. Commissioner Gallant-Clark, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. I do have a question. Thank you for that presentation. I thought it was very informative. So in this particular situation scenario that you're describing, it sounds like it's working out very well. It sounds like everyone is committed to ensuring that there's diversity as far as candidates, that there's fairness in the process and things like that. What kind of disadvantages do you think could occur by a group similar to this having that absolute authority as far as hiring, as far as promotions, as far as all the things that you described? What could be the potential disadvantages of having that group have that type of power?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And I just want to emphasize, it's important to understand that almost all the time we are considering recommendations that are coming to us. So we're not in charge of the whole thing. It's just that we're like the final step, right? And sometimes we're going to disagree with, sometimes we have disagreed with what's been recommended to us, but more often than not, we go along with it, right? So it's not like, I mean, I suppose in theory, we could go crazy and start doing all this crazy stuff, regardless of what anybody asked us to do. Maybe that's possible. I don't see that actually happening, but you could say the same thing about any sort of legislative body, that they could possibly do that, and you hope they wouldn't. So I think, you know, the one authority we don't have, right? And I'm not saying we should have it, I'm just saying we don't have, is we can't independently go out and investigate stuff, right? We don't have any staff, for example. We have no budget. So our staff is basically the police department. And so that's that's different, but you have a different situation. You have an inspector general now, you have two independent boards that have different roles to play in these investigating these kinds of complaints. They don't have the authority to have the final say, but they do have the authority, and my experience, I think all of you are involved in public affairs a lot. Sometimes you can get change without using legal authority. It's just by talking about stuff in public and saying, here's what happened, and here's everything people need to know. And you talk to journalists, and that has a big impact. And I think just having people who are able to sort of publicly talk about this stuff, just like you're doing now, is how change happens.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Gallant-Clark. Any further questions from commissioners? Steve, did you have a question?
I do. Same question I asked the Corporation Counsel, Mike. The disciplinary authority that you have, is that recognized in the collective bargaining agreement?
Yes, I think that's where the 15-day threshold comes from. So
okay.
Everything more than 15 days. And in the most recent one, I don't want to go into all the details, but the recommendation was a 6-month suspension, and we ultimately imposed a 16-day suspension. And there's a whole backstory to that, but gives you an idea how that works.
Read the New Haven Independent if you really want to.
Yeah, well, that's not even the whole story, but I can't.
I get it. It's Paul Bass's story anyhow. But
I'm very satisfied with that outcome. But there's a lot to that story, but we'll leave it.
Let me raise something. I was going to raise this after you spoke, Mr. Chairman, if I may, just as a point of privilege. One of the points I was making by raising the issue of collective bargaining agreements, one of the speakers that we were supposed to have tonight was Danny Roach, who's a commissioner in Bridgeport. And he said, well, I'm really sorry you called on me. I said, well, why is that? He said, well, we lost all of our disciplinary authority. And I said, how did you lose your disciplinary authority? I've worked on their charter. It's in the charter. He said, well, the mayor gave it all up in the last collective bargaining agreement, except we still can engage in discipline for civilian complaints. That's the sole jurisdiction for discipline in Bridgeport, in spite of what their charter says. And their charter says very similar things to the charter in New Haven. They have lost their disciplinary authority due to a collective bargaining agreement. Waterbury is the same case. Waterbury has, again, I talked to one of their members I was trying to get to speak tonight when we lost Dan Roach, and we spoke for about 45 minutes this evening or this late afternoon. Same thing in Waterbury. Most of the authority for discipline has gone away. It's been gone for a long time. The current mayor is a former police chief, and he was able to move the police commission out of the discipline business so that he could control discipline back in the 1980s in Waterbury. So just because we put it in the charter doesn't mean it necessarily will exist. And that's an important point that needs to be made. But I do have a question for Mike, because Mike talked about the state inspector general. Let's assume you're in Bridgeport and you've lost your disciplinary authority within the context of the collective bargaining agreement, but you still have plenary authority in the charter to conduct reviews, to conduct investigations, and the like. Do you think that they could, outside of the collective bargaining agreement, conduct an investigation or review to collect information that they could send to the state inspector general? Is that something you think is possible? I was curious up front.
As I said, the new state inspector general is Judge Bob Devlin, right?
Yeah,
who's one of the most respected judges in the state, retired judge. And it's up to him how he wants to handle answering questions like you just asked. Okay, but I do know, because I did talk to folks, as they were sort of formulating the accountability bill, I think that's what they had in mind, right? That people would bring to the inspector general's office complaints, and the inspector general, if he or she chose to, could investigate those complaints and do something about it. So the state inspector general has two options, right? If they take a complaint and find that it's a valid complaint, they can either bring criminal charges against the officer, and they themselves would prosecute the case, or they can recommend the officer be decertified to post directly, or both, right? And that second thing is something that has really been missing, because in the past, the only person who could get a request to decertify a cop to the post counsel, which has the final say on whether to do it, is the chief in that department. And now you have this other avenue to do that. Now, what the state inspector general doesn't seem like they can do, although it's not really clear yet, is do anything other than criminal charges or decertification, right? I don't think they can suspend the person or put a letter in their file or anything like that. But, we'll see over time. And my sense is that, this is going to take some time to play out, but my sense is that the inspector general's office, assuming it's properly resourced and staffed, et cetera, going forward, is going to be able to begin to compile data that policymakers can look at. Like, how many complaints did we look at? What categories of complaints are we talking about? What was the outcome of these things? And I think if it turns out there's a lot that are not being taken seriously at the local level, for example. You know, maybe Inspector General can say, hey, look, we're getting a lot of complaints. It's not enough to bring criminal charges, doesn't amount to a decertification thing, but it seems like nothing happened with these complaints at the local level. And that's almost an invitation to the legislature to enact another statutory change to address that. I will say, you know, the collective bargaining is not going to help when it comes to decertification or criminal charges. And, you know, to me, like that's the most significant reform that was in that legislation last year, even though very few people were complaining about the legislation, never mentioned that. If they were really worried about what it might do to them, they should have focused on that. But
no, that's a remarkably expansive role for the state to play.
It is, yeah.
Another place for local folks to go to. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Michael.
Yep.
Thanks, Steve. Commissioner Kennedy.
Through the chair, good evening. This question is probably more for Steve than for Representative Lawler, but my question is in terms of seeing police unions attack the collective bargaining process to get around state statute and local charter changes. Is it possible in the charter to restrict the mayor's ability when he negotiates or what he can negotiate in the collective bargaining agreement? I mean, because I can see this happening. We could pass some really great stuff, and I'm not the biggest fan of the Hartford Police Union. I did not have the best experience when I was served on city council with them. Consider them a little resistant to change. You know, we put these changes in, and what they'll do is they'll immediately go right to the collective bargaining process and try to basically bargain it all away for probably for some great budget savings for that particular time period. That's my concern.
Yeah, well, I don't want to violate the rules of the chair because we can probably discuss this during discussion, but the reason for my last question to Representative Lawler about the role of the Inspector General is that may be a way, if you were to establish an authority within the charter to create an independent ability that can't be given away in collective bargaining. It's a state law that takes precedence. There's a statute in MIRA right now, there's a provision in MIRA that says collective bargaining agreements have superior standing to our charter, to our local ordinances. So when you adopt a collective bargaining agreement and it has a provision that's contrary to a provision in your charter, the collective bargaining agreement governs. And what, and I'll look into this a little further, but what Representative Lawler was pointing out may be another avenue within the charter to cite an independent review standard if we were to establish a police commission, whereby they could conduct their reviews so that they could comply with or take advantage of the state law. We'll have to see how the law is going to be administered, as the representative said. We'll have to see how what resources they have and how capable they're going to be of administering it. But that may be a way to leverage a role for a local authority, not have to worry about the collective bargaining agreement. That's why I found it so interesting and intriguing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Kennedy. Any other questions? Okay, seeing none. Mike and Howard, thank you very much for coming this evening. We really appreciate it. This was really helpful as we consider these issues, and we may be reaching back out to you for additional questions or the like. So again, really appreciate it, and have a great night.
Thanks, and best of luck, you guys.
Thank you. Steve, do you briefly, I know we talked about the, we talked about collective bargaining. You also have a graph in this background document kind of comparing the composition of police commissions, if they have them in various municipalities. And then you have some information on the Berkeley Police Review Commission and Sacramento, Seattle, Rochester. So if you want to just briefly discuss that real quick.
Yeah, I'll be very quick. The Berkeley stuff wasn't my research. The Berkeley, I a little bit. The Berkeley was in the resolution that was adopted by the Common Council. So those 4 entities were entities that were referred to in the resolution by the Hartford Common Council. And they have, again, there are different types of entities that you can look to if we want to look to a model for police commission in Hartford. With respect to appointment, I know that Commissioner Rubenstein has talked about elected bodies, and he's right. I remember going to National League of City meetings and meeting guys walking around with guns, and I said, "Who are you? Are you on the city council?" "Oh, no, I'm on the police commission in Detroit or in Atlanta." And they had badges and guns and all that kind of stuff. I guess it was easier to get them on planes back then, back in the 1980s. But in Connecticut, I do not list any of the elected bodies. I know that Berlin has an elected police commission, but most of the other police commissions in the state of Connecticut are appointed by the mayor or the Board of Selectmen in Fairfield, and serve for various terms of office. And there's a number of communities that just don't have them. You're not the only one. Danbury doesn't have a Board of Police Commissioners in a city not quite the size of Hartford, but 81,000. Some of the smaller cities, Meriden, Manchester, do not have boards of police commissioners. And then some of the smaller cities, East Hartford, Middletown, and Stratford do not have board of police commissioners. Again, I just wanted to point out for the record that I did a lot of work last year, and we're going to finalize it again this year. The Hamden, Mel Medina will be happy to hear, Commissioner Medina will be happy to hear that Hamden is I guess he's gone. Oh, he's there. Has reinstated their charter commission. So all the work we did with his help last year is going to be back on the table. And Hamden has very similar authority to New Haven, and it's in the collective bargaining agreement. So they are a pretty robust entity, and they are also appointed by mayor, subject to confirmation. So that's all I have to add at this point. And I did talk about the impact of collective bargaining multiple times this evening.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Medina. You have a question?
I think partly in response to Commissioner Kennedy, should we as a commission be going down the route of a police commission? I think this appointment, who appoints who, is going to be really important, because in part, when you have police commissioners who are appointed by a mayor, the same executive that's running the negotiation process, I think as a police commissioner, you may be less inclined to speak out publicly if your powers are being negotiated away, assuming you even know that that's actually happening. But I want to thank Attorney Mendick, because I think continuing to go back to this question of collective bargaining agreements is critically important, and makes me think whether or not we should be considering as a commission, not just because of the police commission or the CBA for police officers in particular, but whether or not we need to be putting in some sunlight provisions in the charter that govern the process of collective bargaining agreements, at least notification to the public about what's happening. Because I have to imagine no one in Bridgeport knows that their police commission has lost its powers. And if you file a complaint, you'll find out once they tell you, a year later. So just curious if that's something that's possible in charter, or if we would be running afoul of mirror or some other law that we're not aware of.
Something you already did, by the way, in the budget provision. We have provisions in the budget where the mayor has to provide a narrative on lines that are directly impacted by collective bargaining contract provisions. Principally, that's police and fire overtime would be those types of provisions. You could certainly have some provision in the agreement where the mayor by law is the principal representative of the community. There's nothing we can do by charter to change that. We can't do anything about binding arbitration, which limits the role, as Commissioner Kennedy will tell us, and Commissioner DeJesus and Commissioner Gale will tell you, as members of the council and former members of the council. Binding arbitration has limitations on the ability of the legislative body to ultimately play a robust role, and also the very short period of time that the council gets with collective bargaining agreements, which could be up to 40 or 45 days if they're lucky, is another issue as well. So that they very often do not know the policy issues. They know what the salary increases are, the percentage increase. They may know what the retirement age is going to be if the retirement age changes, but they may not know or be fully aware that they've done something to modify discipline in that process, because they tend to be focusing on numbers and not on the other policy aspects of it. So we could consider some kind of disclosure provision in the mayor's authority, because the mayor is legally, statutorily responsible for presenting, so that when the mayor presents collective bargaining agreements, they need to provide almost like a truth in lending report to the legislative body and to the public as to what's in there. The other thing that you could think about, and it's trickier, and we ran into issues in Hamden and ultimately didn't press it. We may press it this year a little bit with the new mayor, and that is the legislative body. One of the reasons we've put this stuff in the budget is so that the legislative body can look at the budget every year and say, that damn provision in that contract is costing us $100,000 a week or $50,000 a week. And what services are we getting? And then demand of the mayor, before they go into collective bargaining, that they need to do something about it. They need to change it. And the same is true with the discipline issues. Those are things that you can, they're not typically placed in there, but if they're important enough to you, you can alter the authority of the mayor and consider placing some language in there that would be of that effect.
I mean, I like the idea of that. I think thinking of the perspective of someone who's serving on the legislative side of things, you know, the general public doesn't understand or know why the discipline isn't there anymore. And I've been in the scenarios working with local city council members when a collective bargaining agreement is being sent their way for their final approval. It's as you said, it's a bullet points of like the material changes as it relates to the budget. And so I just like that idea, just for the purposes of kind of making this more transparent for the public about what's actually happening here. And in some ways, providing the legislators of the local body some cover to say, like, if you don't like that, there was, the executive is who negotiated that agreement. And that just provides a process that's a bit more accessible to the public, at least explanatory wise.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Medina, and look forward to a robust discussion on this issue at a later meeting, hopefully next month. And in the meantime, if there is information that commissioners would like that would kind of supplement their thoughts based on this conversation today, please feel free to reach out to Steve and I to make that request. You don't have to make it now. You can make it in the future. One thing I would like to see is to have a high-level description of the police accountability bill that's passed at the state level, sent around to folks, and then a copy of the legislation as well if folks want to dig into that. And there may be some other items for folks to look at before we have that discussion. So appreciate everyone's questions this evening. And if there are no further questions for Attorney Mendick on the document that he put forward this evening, which doesn't seem like there are, we can move on to item number 5, the discussion of background document number 11 on appointment authority. So in our last conversation on the boards and commissions, we asked Attorney Mednick to take a look at how other municipalities handle appointments to boards and commissions, in the state. And Attorney Mednick has done that analysis for us. So Attorney Mednick, if you want to describe your findings, then after that, we can ask questions and have a bit of discussion. I don't anticipate us coming to any final recommendations tonight, but I do want to have a bit of a working session on this to cover any other questions that we may have. And we're still waiting for Majority Leader Clark to send over his recommendations. I just want to let folks know that I had a brief conversation with him about our conversations last meeting, and as it pertains to potentially providing appointments to the council, just limited to boards and commissions that are mentioned in the charter. So he's taking that under advisement, and I'm sure he'll get back to us within the next meeting or so. So Steve, you have the floor.
Thank you, and I'll try to keep it focused and brief as I can. So as you'll see, as we walk through the provisions, what I tried to do was give you a breakdown of the appointing authority and the role of counsel. Is one of the issues that we've been considering here, is having multiple appointment authorities for different boards and commissions. And I can just say in summation that generally boards and commissions are appointed by mayors. You'll see that's the case in Bridgeport. However, there is no confirmation authority for the council in Bridgeport. The mayor just gets to appoint boards and commissions, with the exception of the library board, which is a self-appointing, self-perpetuating board, although the council in Bridgeport has the ability to remove members from boards or commissions. In Stamford, there's a more traditional advice and consent proceeding where the mayor appoints and the council provides advice and consent. New Haven is the same. All board and commission appointments are mayoral and council approval, aldermanic approval. Waterbury has a slightly different system. The mayor makes all appointments subject to the right to reject. And it requires a supermajority vote of 10 members in Waterbury to reject. So all mayoral appointments are, the council, the board of aldermen is notified, but they only act on those that they seek to reject. Again, advice and consent in Norwalk is the rule. Danbury, the charter is silent, both on mayoral appointment authority and council approval. After reading the charter, I called the Corp Council and confirmed that that is the case, but they do have advice and consent by ordinance. It's not governed by charter. New Britain, I actually did this charter many, many years ago. Up to the time I did the charter, the mayor had appointment authority and removal authority. There were no terms to members serving on boards and commissions. And so if you're on a police commission in New Britain and the mayor didn't like what you did, the next day you could be off and the mayor would then reappoint you. I was able to get them to move to a situation where the mayor appoints to a term, but the council does not have any authority for approval. Hamden, you have advice and consent, and Bristol has advice and consent, but in Bristol, you do have, like in Hartford, you have the Audit Commission, which has multiple appointment sources. In Bridgeport, the council appoints a council member to serve on the Board of Police Commissioners and the Personnel Committee, although they serve, ironically, at the pleasure of the mayor. So the general rule is, again, that the mayors appoint councils, usually have advice and consent authority, but in some cases do not. But the general rule is these are mayoral appointments. We wanted to look at the state a little bit, and I actually ended up talking to the president of the Senate for a while, almost an hour, because he was really ruminating on this issue. State law is all over the place in terms of appointment and appointment authority and approval authority, but the legislature usually, in its political wisdom, usually negotiates the best deal they can get. in terms of how people go on commissions and how many of their friends and neighbors get appointed to commissions. And so it tends to be a negotiated process. Although on page 6 and 7 of the memo, you will find that there's a whole series of commissions that kind of fall into line with the direction that some people seem to be heading in Hartford. If you take a look at some of the government reform entities that were created post-Watergate, the Freedom of Information Commission, the Ethics Advisory Commission, and SEEK, the State Elections Enforcement Commission, which I happen to know very well because I was their first executive director back when I was about 12 years old. And it was pre-law school, but I wasn't 12. On those commissions, you have multiple appointing sources. In fact, it's majority legislative sources. You have the Speaker, President Pro Tem, and the minority leaders of the House and Senate, and the governor, each make an appointment to the Freedom of Information Commission, the Ethics Advisory Board, and the State Elections Commission. State Property Review Board, again, is a legislative entity because of a scandal that occurred, I believe, in the 1980s, where that was created out of a scandal that occurred. And the same is true of some of the other boards. CHRO is a multiple party appointed board. The governor has a majority of 5 appointments to 4 legislative appointments, but the legislative appointments are split between the various leaders of the legislative body. And those are all done not by a statute that governs that, but by the statute that was created for that purpose. And a standard was established in the 1970s when many of these entities were created, again, in the post-Watergate environment. At the back of the document, and generally, when I hand out a document like this, you will see in the back of the document actual literal sections from the charters, so that if you want to see what Bridgeport has done, you'll follow their endnotes to the back of the document, and you get to see the language almost as if going to a restaurant. You can order the section that you're interested in and let me know at some point that that's what you're interested in. But I wanted to give you a sense of how these provisions work in the different communities throughout the state. I'll be happy to answer questions or defer to your discussion.
Thanks, Steve. Does anyone have any questions on the document first? Commissioner Gallen-Clark.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Wolf, I have a question for Attorney Metnick.
Please proceed.
Attorney Metnick, I want to go back to Bristol. On the document, it says that the council appoints all. I didn't hear you say that, but that's what I'm seeing. Is that correct?
They use different language in Bristol. Bristol's language, I was just talking to their former Commission counsel about that. The mayor nominates and the council then appoints. It's the same as the mayor proposes and the council approves. That it doesn't mean anything different, but that's the language they use. In fact, it was funny because I had a debate with a commission member in Hamden who got very upset when I talked about council confirmation. And he said, no, councils ultimately appoint. The mayor just nominates and the council appoints. I think that's ancient language. It's not the language that's used in most charters, but I now understand where that member of the commission was coming from, and I'm glad I wasn't rude to him when he raised the issue. But that's all it is. It's the same.
Okay.
It's the same. It's different language, but it's the same authority.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
My pleasure. Thanks for the question.
Okay, we can now entertain discussion on this item. I know there may be commissioners that have some opinions based on these findings from other cities. Commissioner Gallen-Clark. Commissioner Rubenstein, we will come to you second. We're going to recognize Commissioner Gallen-Clark.
I think sometimes when you look at the practices from other cities, it's very helpful. For me, this feedback is not helpful because all the other cities are showing that the mayor is appointing. And so I still have the major concern regarding the balance of power. I've gotten feedback from a number of people that they would like to be more involved in the recommendations. Community organizations would like to be able to make the recommendations. There's a provision right now as far as seeking feedback from community organizations. It's in writing. I don't know how concerted of an effort has been made in the past, and I don't know who monitors that process to solicit candidates for these various commissions. I would like to see more of a balance. I know, again, from talking to some city council individuals that that's what they're saying. And I would love to see what Majority Leader Clark comes up with, but there needs to be a balance of power. There really needs to be a balance of power because now you have all these commissioners that's beholding to one person who appointed them. And a lot of times they're really hesitant to say or do anything outside of that parameter. So I'm really concerned about this. I really am.
Okay.
Can I just say one thing, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, go ahead, Steve.
The intent of my memo was not to push you in a direction, was simply to demonstrate what's going on. There's, I believe that under home rule, you do have vast authority with respect to how you construct your appointment process. I too would love to see what the majority leader has to say, because ultimately the council is going to be opining on what it is that you say. So it's useful to do it. But one of the things I wanted you to think about, and I think I've said this before, and if I'm repeating myself, Mr. Chairman, gavel me to silence, please. And that is, maybe you should look at the 4 or 5 commissions that are sitting in the charter as the place to start, because you don't want to start going to the 40 commissions, and then maybe if you want to move in the direction of a slightly different appointment structure, give the council authority with the ordinance-based commissions to do that if they want to do it. So that would be my only advice if that's the direction you want to take. I'm not trying to facilitate it. I'm not trying to steer you in a direction. I wanted you to know that I was not trying not to steer you in a direction with the memo. The memos just state the facts in the statement.
No, I thank you for that.
All right, thank you for your comments, Commissioner Gallant-Clark. We're going to go to Commissioner Rubenstein next, followed by Commissioner Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, I understand we have home rule, and I understand we have in Hartford basically 3 branches of government: a mayor, council, and treasurer. And for me, the balance of power is a question always. And I just want to point out that in some cities and towns, some of the boards and commissions are elected as opposed to appointed. With respect to appointments, I want to see, and only speaking for myself here, but I want to see more appointments by the council so that there's some balance of power and some equity. I understand in Chapter 7, which deals with boards, that the mayor has removal power. If we, in our wisdom, have more appointments by the council, then they probably also should have the power of removal. Now, speaking for myself, by way of disclosure, with respect to the Audit Commission, which is a named commission in Chapter 7, I have to say that I am on the Audit Commission. I'm one of 3 commissioners. So whatever we do with respect to that particular commission, I'll be abstaining in the future. But I do want to say that we have 3 commissioners, one appointed by the treasurer, one appointed by the council, and one appointed by the top 10 taxpayers. We recently had a major problem in that it took about 8 months to get somebody through the process of the top 10 taxpayers, and ultimately 2 positions went to the council and they selected one. But that process took 8 months. The Corp Counsel, in their presentation to the commission some months ago, suggested that that particular area of the audit commission be changed. And I agree with this because it took too long to get that through. My suggestion would be to have the chief auditor and the 2 surviving or remaining commissioners send out notice to the community, gather requisite resumes. They would have the power to select 2 or 3 candidates based on qualifications, send those to the council, and then the council can pick in their discretion whom they feel would be the best candidate. And I think that would be a quicker and smoother process. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Rubenstein. Steve, you have a comment?
I do have a comment. I'm not on mute. This is not something I did for you. It's something I did for one of my other towns. I'm looking at a chart that I haven't distributed yet with regard to elected commissions. Most of the cities of your size do not have elected boards and commissions. You start seeing elected boards and commissions when you start getting down to Greenwich, which is about 63,000. And the boards and commissions that you see with elections, well, we don't have a board of finance, but like the Board of Assessment Appeals, the Zoning Board of Appeals, the ZBA alternates, the Town Planning and Zoning Commission, the Town Planning and Zoning alternates. That's the town that has the most elected officials and the most boards and commissions, but those are the boards that tend to be elected. None of them are cities of the size of Hartford, Bridgeport, Stamford, New Haven, Waterbury, Norwalk. They're all starting below Hartford and Greenwich are the 2 largest cities that have any of those. And in West Hartford, West Hartford, the only elected board is the Board of Education, which is pretty standard. Greenwich has a Board of Assessment Appeals that's elected as well, and a Board of Finance, or a Board of Estimate, they call it in Greenwich. So that is not the norm in larger communities. Again, Berlin does have an elected police commission. They were too small to show up in my survey, but we happen to know that they have an elected Board of Police Commissioners in that town. I just wanted to point that out for the record.
Yeah, but Steve, isn't it correspondingly true that the larger cities have vastly worse voting percentages? We just had a Board of Education election in which we didn't even muster 5%. And
Can I tell you something?
And perhaps if we had something where some of these boards and commissions were elected, perhaps that might go a long way to getting the voting percentages in the city of Hartford up beyond 4.5%.
Let me tell you something. I just had a conversation with a first selectman this morning from a town, I won't name the town, 27,173 population is the town. So you can look it up and find out who it is. And they were telling me, because we were talking about the issue of referenda, all right, in terms of voter participation. I happen to be working on a charter in a town with an RTM with a petition for referendum. And we were just talking about that concept and that issue. And he says, I really would like to see us move away from referenda. And I said, why? He said, because on our last budget referenda, we had 6% of our population. 6% of our population. And I said, that's astounding to me that that was the turnout. And I was astounded because of what we've heard in Hartford. So I just wanted you to know that it is not a Hartford problem. It's a civic culture problem. in the world we're living in today. Now that, again, am I telling you that something scientific? I just happened to have this conversation this morning with a first selectman, and I was absolutely blown. I was going to call James about it today because I was absolutely blown away by that comment. So I'm not sure what the answer is, Commissioner Rubenstein, but I'm not sure that you're much different than some of the smaller communities that are having problems getting people out to vote at their budget referenda.
Well, I'm not asking for a budget referendum, but
no. I'm just saying, I'm talking about election participatory democracy. I'm talking about getting people out to an important election. Their budget's important. The Board of Education is important. That's the connection.
If we continue to do the same things, we're going to have the same result.
I'm not arguing against it. I'm just telling you it's not your problem alone. I'm saying it's an endemic problem.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Rubenstein and Steve, for that information. Commissioner Kennedy, you have the floor.
Thank you, through the chair. With respect to the council removal of appointed and even their executive positions, charter does provide by a supermajority vote 7 of 9 for that removal. Council has that authority right now. I know I proposed that in the, I think either 2000 or 2010 charter revision. I didn't even know it was in 2000. We've had that power existing for some time. It's rarely used for the obvious reasons. For the boards and commissions, I think we're going to need a separate meeting to really hash this out. There are going to be positions like, for example, the police commission, if we go in that direction. That's probably going to be something we probably want an elected position for. Or maybe we want a hybrid. I mean, we can have that long discussion. I think there's going to be other boards and commissions we want to be council appointed or council and mayoral appointed. And then the rest of the commissions will probably go back. I mean, this is just my thoughts now. For the aging commission or some of those things, those are issues of importance, but they may be more, there may not be a council may not have interest in making those appointments. I think council has some interest in some very specific commissions where they want appointment authority. We can look at those and have that discussion, but it's going to be a much longer discussion than the next 5, 10, 15 minutes we can have here this evening to really go through that process. And I don't think we don't have to go through all the boards and commissions of the city of Hartford, but I think we just need to identify the ones where there's interest from the legislative body in changing the appointment authority. Let's have that discussion, and that be the only thing we discuss that particular evening when we have it. It's just a suggestion to the chair. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And this certainly won't be the last time we discuss it. I think the thought behind, bringing this up again and again is just to make incremental progress on the issue so that we can figure out how to frame that kind of final working session and really be effective instead of just throwing around ideas without having all the requisite information in front of us. As folks may know, we do have flex time, quote unquote, left within the schedule in the coming months where we can throw in a third meeting if possible. And then the way that our schedule is set up, we also are ending these nights with panel discussions right around March 3rd. So that gives us roughly 6 to 7 weeks to just focus on hashing out issues. So we're not leaving things right up until the last 2 weeks in scrambling. Appreciate your suggestion, Commissioner Kennedy, and we'll certainly figure out a way to accommodate that because I think it makes a lot of sense. Any other comments on this point of discussion this evening? Okay. Seeing none, we're going to move on to action item number 5. And this is something we discussed at our last meeting, and it has to do with removing or repealing rather, the section regarding benefit assessments from the chapter 2 of the charter. So it's chapter 2, section 3, and then removing the section pertaining to, let's pull it up here, the power to adopt regulatory ordinances, and that has to do with fines exceeding $100, which is something that's already addressed in the general statutes. We had discussed it at our last meeting and listed it as an action item today. So I'll entertain a motion for repeal of both of those sections, and then we can have a discussion on the motion.
So moved.
The motion was made by Commissioner DeJesus and seconded by Commissioner Rubenstein. Is there any discussion? Okay, seeing none. We will go to a roll call vote. Commissioner DeJesus.
Aye.
Councilman Gale.
Abstain.
Commissioner Aponte.
He's muted.
I'm sorry. Yes.
Commissioner Aralampalum. He's dropped off. Commissioner Bonafonte, Commissioner Gallon Clark,
Yes.
Commissioner Harrington, Commissioner Kennedy.
Yes, and do we have sufficient numbers for quorum? I'm trying to figure that out.
Yeah, I think we're okay.
Okay.
Commissioner Qualsh and Commissioner Medina.
Yes.
Commissioner Jeter.
Yes.
Commissioner Rubenstein.
Yes.
Commissioner Smith.
Yes.
Commissioner Wolf, yes. Okay, that's 9 in favor, none voting no, and 1 abstention, so the motion carries. And without objection, at 8:52, we'll adjourn for the evening. Thank you, folks.
Right.